Larry Sabato, welcome back to Planet America.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
So, Larry, what do you make of these comparisons we're hearing at the moment between 1968 and 2024 and the suggestions from the likes of Bernie Sanders that Gaza could become Joe Biden's Vietnam?
No, and I lived through both of those campaigns, was actually a bit active. I was in Chicago, the site of the Democratic Convention, right before the convention began, and it was already an armed camp thanks to Mayor Richard J. Daley of Chicago. But this year is a pale shadow of 1968, at least so far. You never know what's going to develop. And ironically, the Democrats have set their convention in late August for Chicago. It was late August in Chicago in 1968. But I don't think the similarities are as strong, certainly, as Bernie Sanders suggested. That was overheated.
Well, first of all, hats off to you, Larry, for showing up to Chicago 1968 when you were 16 years old. That is admirable nerdery on your part.
I lied about my age. That's how I got into everything. I lied about my age.
But yeah, as far as polling goes, how do the American people feel about these college protests? Do they think that the protests have gone too far? Do they think that the police might have overreacted? What's the vibe at the moment?
Well, it depends on which side you're on. You know, if you support Israel and you think that the United States should maintain that alliance, obviously you're not happy about the kinds of demonstrations you're seeing from the pro-Palestinian side. If you, however, are in between or feel badly about both sides or are pro-Palestinian, you're very unhappy about it. And young people are much more likely to be pro-Palestinian. There is a real age gap, a credibility gap that we see emerging in the polls.
So, Larry, obviously you've been around college campuses in America for decades now. How well do you think the various colleges have been responding to these latest protests?
Every school's different. I would say no one has done as poorly as UCLA and Columbia. I think you've seen that on your television coverage of it as well. They mishandled almost every piece of it. And I have sympathy for them because it's hard to know exactly what to do. I have to be honest, I'm here at the University of Virginia, and we've had some pretty intense demonstrations in recent days, and we haven't handled them perfectly, and I'm being a little kind to us. Someone, and we're still not sure, ordered the Virginia State Police to come onto our campus. And when you order state police onto a campus in full riot gear, you're nearly guaranteeing that bad things are going to happen. And sure enough, bad things happen. So I have great sympathy for all the college presidents and administrators. It's important to maintain a dialogue and to make sure that both sides understand the rules and you don't change the rules in the middle of the game. That hasn't always been true.
Now, the protests at colleges are new, but protesting about Gaza generally has obviously been going on for over 6 months now. So do you think that all that protesting has moved the needle on American public opinion about the war?
Well, it has, oddly enough. I would say public opinion here is still pro-Israel, at least among older adults. But younger adults, I'd say it's more pro-Palestinian, and the demonstrations that young people have seen on campuses around the country probably have had some effect on them. And it's not just that, it's also the news footage that we see every night when we watch the evening news. It's pretty devastating. Now, it was very devastating for Israel on October 7th. Since then, it's been devastating in terms of the approximately, I believe, 35,000 Gazans who've been killed, many of them infants and children. So you put that footage on every night, it does have an impact. We saw this during Vietnam. Maybe that's what Bernie Sanders was referring to. I can remember clearly America was very pro-Vietnam War, pro-U.S. involvement from the early 60s through about 66, 67. And then the news media started covering it even more. They had correspondents there. They were able to get footage out quickly. And every Friday, we had a total of dead and wounded for the U.S. and exaggerated totals for the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. But when you saw those totals adding up, you dreaded the Friday news. And it did have an effect on public support of the Vietnam War. And I think it was one of the factors that propelled us toward withdrawal.
And in your view, Larry, will Trump and the Republicans be able to take a page out of Richard Nixon's 1968 playbook and run a law and order campaign off the back of these protests?
Oh, definitely. Well, they're following two playbooks. Remember, their strongest support is among evangelical Christians. Trump, despite his very loose private life over the years, got 83% of the votes of evangelical Christians in 2020. Maybe some of the current business in the Manhattan trial will have an effect on that. But they are pro-evangelical Christian, and as you know, a fundamental belief among evangelical Christians is that the second coming will happen there in Israel and the Middle East. And the other factor that they pay close attention to is that older Americans are especially susceptible to the use of the law and order issue. And you're so right to bring that up. As I say, I'm old enough to remember all the commercials from Nixon and the Republicans in '68 about restoring law and order. And we're going to be the ones to do it. The Democrats can't, and that's why the cities are in the mess they're in. We're going to see some of the same ads this fall. You can predict it pretty clearly already.
Now, you said that these protests are only a faint echo of 1968, but if the news hypes them up enough and if there are enough negative ads about them, do you think they can impact Biden's fortunes anyway?
Well, they could. I don't think many young people are going to end up voting for Donald Trump. I don't care what spring polls say, but they could get discouraged and not vote. And Biden won them by 30 plus percentage points in 2020. He can't afford to have young people not turn out. Also, young people are being disproportionately attracted to the third party candidates like RFK Jr. Those votes come from both sides, but I think in the end, they will come mainly from Biden. So it's non-voting and voting for third party candidates, not voting for Trump among young people, that will cost Biden.
The candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, Larry, is something of a historical echo in and of itself. But I wonder, though, given that he is very pro-Israel and not very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, is that going to be an effective way of attracting younger voters?
I don't know that they'll ever find out because the way our system works, not just the news media, but also the advertising that's aired, it tends to be focused on what the candidates think is their most important issue or issues. And as usual, the economy is probably more important than anything else. Immigration would be second. Abortion would be tied for second, and that helps Democrats rather than Republicans. And RFK Jr., even though he's doing maybe 10% on average in the surveys, that's not good enough to get anything close to equal treatment on the news shows. And I don't think he's going to be able to afford anything comparable to what the two major party candidates get in television advertising, even though he has picked a vice president who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That is nothing in our system. We're going to spend billions, as we always do, on a presidential race. Each of these candidates will spend billions. I know that's hard to believe and understand. It is for me, but we'll set a new record this year, as we always do.
Now, you've said that the trend of Trump making inroads amongst younger voters may not be real, but what do you think about the trend of Biden making inroads amongst older voters? Is that real? And if it is, why would that be?
That's because of the abortion issue. It's because of some of the more extreme policies of not just Donald Trump, but the Republicans running the U.S. House of Representatives and Congress. And that's alienated older voters who tend to be conservative, but they're moderate conservative. They're centrist conservative. They want the system to hold together. I'm going to be honest again. I don't think that will hold up either. I think in the end, older voters will end up doing what they usually do in this hyper-partisan era, where everybody has a party ID and 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10 end up voting their party ID no matter what they've said in May.
So, Larry, you've said that you don't really pay too close attention to polls that come out in springtime in an election year. But 6 months out from the election now, what are you looking at to get a sense of where this race is up to?
Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't pay attention to the polls. I look at them so I can criticize them. So I am paying attention to the polls, but it's the bigger trends that really matter. What is happening in Donald Trump's trial, and this is the least important of the trials that he may face, Question is, will he face any others before November? But he has some serious problems on that front. The more coverage of his, quote, sins, the more likely he is to lose 1 or 2% of his support. Well, that's the election. This is a really, really close election. 43,000 votes determined it in 2020. Even though Joe Biden won the popular vote by over 7 million, it was 43,000 votes total in the 7 swing states that determine our presidential elections. So I don't know whether it'll be 43,000 or 100,000 or 10,000, but it'll be a tiny number of votes. So the macro trends, what happens in the economy, what happens internationally, is the United States drawn in, I hope not, to a foreign war? These things will matter more than anything else, and that will determine the results.
Finally, Larry, is it possible that someone with a 38% presidential approval rating could win an election?
You're referring to Biden, I assume. Biden's approval rating is 38. Donald Trump's is 33. And the president's going to be one of those two. I know it seems insane, but that's our system. The candidates have been picked by millions of voters in their parties, and that's the choice. And so one of the lowly rated candidates is going to win the next 4 years in the White House, period. None of the third party or independent candidates will win.
Dr. Larry Sabato, always great to get your insights. Thank you for being with us on Planet America.
Always enjoy it. Thank you.